Alright, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Tokenicer, and I'm here to bring you guys in-depth analysis, news, and insights from the digital asset space, along with covering the progressive tokenization of the world. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out tokenicer.network for all my content platforms conveniently linked in one spot, from my Twitter threads, Medium articles, Spotify podcasts, and much more. And of course, that'll be linked right down in the description below as usual. So today we've got another introductory breakdown for you guys, and this time it's about Energy Web Token. They're one of the most unique projects that I've seen from this space, ranging from how they started out with the Energy Web Foundation, their vision of being the new energy grid infrastructure for all the shifts happening in that industry, some connections within their ecosystem, and so much more. I've been super excited to break this project down for you guys and further help everyone understand this really one-of-a-kind project. But before we start, I just got to remind everyone real quick that I'm not a financial advisor, and therefore nothing you ever hear or read from me should ever be taken as any form of financial or investment advice. But now that we got that out of the way, let's get right into it. We're going to be talking about Energy Web Token and basically going over the main fundamentals of the project that we'd normally look at when we're giving an introductory overview for a project. So this includes like what the project does and what their goal is, of course, how's the project building around their vision, some connections to either legacy corporations and other individuals or crypto projects, who are the people behind the team, the use cases of their token, and finally a little wrap up with some of my personal thoughts. To start off, Energy Web doesn't really operate like the majority of other projects in this space. Most projects here are building with a specific industry in mind, such as finance, big tech, or supply chains. And while the Energy Web network is targeted towards, of course, the energy sector, the way they got started is quite unique relative to everything else out there. We'll start off with the Energy Web Foundation, since this is really the foundations of how the project started. So the way Energy Web really began was through being founded by two consortium-like institutions that are operating within the whole clean and renewable energy subsector. And these two were the Rocky Mountains Institute and Grid Singularity. And so the purpose of the Energy Web Foundation is to build out an ecosystem of infrastructural players within the energy sector to have this sort of organization of members that are all working towards pushing the adoption of the new energy standards that we keep hearing about, from things like solar energy to wind turbines, hydropower, etc. Well, the members within this foundation really speak for themselves. There's over 100 different members consisting of energy companies, blockchain-related companies, other general tech corporations, nonprofit organizations, academias, etc. And we'll get into what exactly some of these members have built within this foundation, but some of the more notable members in here and companies are like R3, Volkswagen, Shell, General Electric, Hitachi, Vodafone, and EDF. Just by that, we can see these are some of the largest companies within that sector. These are multinational and multi-billion-dollar firms. And so the fact that Energy Web has landed multiple collaborations with members of this caliber, it's really built sort of a moat for them for the initiative that they're going towards. And that's kind of the switch towards clean and renewable energy, which is a perfect segue into what exactly does Energy Web do. We understand that they're a project building around the energy sector, but what exactly is the utility for this project? So fundamentally, they are another layer 1 network, so similar to things like Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, etc. Though what separates them is the purpose of what their blockchain is built for. Of course, it can execute all the basic things that any other layer 1 network should, such as transferring assets between wallet to wallet or executing a smart contract. But what's really unique to Energy Web is that it's largely used for real utilities, such as tracking energy usage, and demand from certain individuals or businesses, or just ensuring trust all throughout the energy grid. And for those of you guys who are unaware of what the energy grid is, it's basically the infrastructure network connecting power providers and consumers. So you could think like any household that requires energy being connected to corporations that provide such resources. Or if it helps you visualize better, think of it as a transmission system for the whole energy sector. And so as we switch towards the new ESG standards of clean renewables, we also need to find a way to reconnect the power grid together, because even though there are already clean and renewable energy sources such as wind turbines and solar panels, and I'm sure many of you guys have seen these around, there's a large problem, and that's these new innovative technologies to find more efficient ways to generate power are unfortunately siloed from the rest of the legacy energy grid, which is largely what Energy Web is looking to accomplish with their network, to hopefully one day be that energy grid that facilitates the entire backbone of the new power system that we'll be migrating towards. And so, of course, that sounds like a pretty large task, right? This is why they've built their proprietary stack that they call the EWT, or Energy Web Decentralized Operating System. And this is really what allows the magic to happen. So there's three main layers within the EWT. At the bottom lies the trust layer, which is arguably the most important layer, and that's the Energy Web chain itself. And so, as we mentioned, the Energy Web chain can be used for a variety of things, from transferring assets to peer-to-peer, to smart contract execution. But of course, its focus on enterprise-grade utility for the energy sector is one of its main use cases, from things like tracking provenance of digital identities within their ecosystem. And these digital identities aren't just representing certain individuals or corporations, but literally everything that lives within the Energy Web ecosystem will have a digital identity. So from things like an electric vehicle, a solar panel, other energy utilities, and of course, individuals and corporations. This enables the ability to track, monitor, and trace everything about a certain part within the network. So for example, whether this electric vehicle is charged through clean renewable energy, or maybe a household that's using up more energy than usual, how are they generating that energy? We'll be talking a lot more about their tracking and tracing capabilities as we go on to discuss their connections, but now that we have a basic understanding of what the purpose of the Energy Web chain is, let's dive a little deeper to see how things fundamentally work, really. So they operate on a consensus called proof of authority, and we've seen some other layer 1 networks use this consensus mechanism, such as VChain. And you can kind of think of this as similar to delegated proof of stake. And a large reason they've done so is because, unlike proof of work in Bitcoin mining, which uses the equivalent amount of energy as a medium-sized country, proof of authority allows a network to reach consensus using the same amount of energy as a medium-sized office. And so it kind of makes sense to be energy efficient for a network that's used to track, trace, and help distribute renewable energies, right? And along with this, unlike proof of work where any user can create a new block, proof of authority relies on a specific group of validators that are responsible for signing and creating the new blocks. So the validator for each specific block is randomly selected through an algorithm. And of course, these validators are some of the corporations within the Energy Web Foundation. And so up until the next block is validated, the validator that signed the most recent block is considered the primary within the network. One interesting thing about how Energy Web is ran is that the network is fully open as a public permissionless network for anyone to join, though the validators within Energy Web are actually permission nodes. And many of you are likely wondering why they are using a hybrid architecture like this, as this is something that's very rarely, if not almost never seen in the blockchain space. And a large reason for this is because of the specifics of how the Energy Web ecosystem is built out to be. If they were to use a completely private and permission network such as, say, Hyperledger, then every single device, individual, and entity that comes into the network will require validation by the Energy Web Foundation. And I'm sure you guys could imagine why that would be a massively inefficient hassle when it comes to really onboarding clients en masse. But on the other end, if they were to use a completely public and permissionless system for the energy infrastructure grid, there would likely be a lot of problems and a ton of potential disasters waiting to happen that large multinational energy corporations would probably want to stay a mile away from. And so those identities that are so heavily utilized within the Energy Web ecosystem are of course stored on-chain on the Energy Web chain to allow for a variety of different operations, from energy sharing to tracing energy usage and demand, and many other analytics along with operations. The other two layers within the Energy Web decentralized operating system consists of the utility layer, which has a variety of different operations in there, from things like interoperability through various bridges, oracles, name services, storage, messaging, etc. Then at the top layer is the toolkit layer, and this is basically what it sounds like. It's multiple software development kits for developers and other individuals and businesses to come on and build applications on the energy network to actually utilize all that's in there and really build applications that are going to help with further transitioning our global energy grid. And so now that we have a general understanding of how the network fundamentally works and what it's for, we can take a look at some of their connections that they formed through partnerships and basically some of the use cases found within these case studies by collaborating with other members in their foundation. So there's over 50 different projects they've built up, and obviously we won't be going over every single one of them in an introductory episode, but let's just go over some of the ones that I personally believe are the most innovative. So first off, there's their collaboration with PTT, which is a multinational energy conglomerate that's state-owned by the Ministry of Energy in Thailand, but they also operate in 110 other countries. And so the main goal of this collaboration is as a response for the demand of international renewable energy certificates, aka IRECs. It's basically a standard for proof of energy attributes that's being adopted by over 50 countries to support the transition to proving that clean and renewable energies were actually used and consumed. The problem that they're really trying to solve is that within the Southeast Asian regions, they've been rather neglected when it comes to the shift to this new renewable IREC standard. As in 2018, we saw that there were roughly 1.2 billion energy attribute certificates being traded around the world, but the overwhelming majority of that was from volumes across the US and Europe, whereas Southeast Asia only represented less than 0.5% of that amount, which is a pretty big problem because it's not like those regions are super small rural areas that don't consume much power either. A lot of those areas are super densely populated urbanized areas that probably consume a large amount of energy. So EnergyWeb and PTT are working together to further integrate and push this standard by doing a variety of things, from sourcing renewable energy certificates from other regions, to tracking sustainability commitment and loyalty of energy sources in corporations through supply chains, all the way to more mainstream kind of initiatives like installing wind turbines and solar panels. This partnership seems perfect for EnergyWeb as they can basically build a platform to not only tokenize these certificates, but also validate all the energy sources on the EnergyWeb marketplaces are following the standard in addition to other energy-related products that they may launch in the future. They've also actually collaborated with Google through receiving a €1 million grant fund to help with providing a digital framework for coordinating distributed energy resources across Europe's power grid. So distributed energy resources are kind of what we see with all these new energy sources. So things like rooftop solar panels, electric vehicle charging stations. These are all great examples of what distributed energy resources are. And it's basically just a way to further decentralize energy generation because, well, it's probably a bad idea to have a fully centralized system of energy generation. And so these also tend to be smaller scale in use, but when used in mass, it has the potential to really change how energy storage, distribution, and transmission can work. So obviously working with Google is already a pretty massive accomplishment. And this is from Google's Impact Challenge on Climate, which is an initiative that's focused on funding projects that's trying to accelerate Europe's progression to a more green future. And while EnergyWeb being headquartered in Berlin, Germany, that seems like it's a match made in heaven. The main things they'll be focused on are mobile network operations, which they'll do so by assigning digital identities to all mobile system-enabled assets through SIM cards, IoT service providers, which they'll do so by registering and connecting all of those IoT devices into the EnergyWeb stack, distribution and transmission system operators, which they'll do by connecting more efficient distributed energy resources onto their networks, aka grids. Overall, this collaboration has a lot of exciting things, from really restructuring the entire energy infrastructure for Europe to just getting to work with one of the largest companies in the world. They've also collaborated with R3. Yes, this is the same R3 that we always talk about when mentioning quants connections. So for anyone who doesn't know about R3, they're basically a tech company that operates almost exclusively in the enterprise and fintech side, and their main product is a permission DLT network they call Corda. And one interesting thing about them is that much like Energy Web, they also started off as a consortium of other companies. Though, of course, the members in the R3 consortium weren't energy companies, but rather some of the biggest financial institutions in the world. I'm talking JP Morgan, Barclays, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, UBS, and 4 others of a very similar caliber. But the main purpose of the partnership between these two are focused on facilitating payments within the Energy Web infrastructure. We've already talked about the inefficient silos within the payments industry before. But when you also add in the silos from both the correspondent banking system and the disconnect in our current energy grid across less developed regions, it creates a lot of problems. So the Energy Web team wants payments to be settled in tokens over the network, since this would probably be the most agnostic and neutral way, as you don't really have to account for cross-currency exchanges between companies that operate in opposite ends of the world. But this is just what happens on the back end. Since while it does make it easier to use a token because of its agnostic value and fungibility to other currencies, companies aren't going to want to deal with token amounts or the fluctuations in a token's price, which is where R3 comes in. So Corda has been integrated into the Energy Web decentralized operating system, which allows the front end of these payments to simply connect to a correspondent bank that the company is using by having the transaction show up as a bill credit within the traditional billing system that's managed by Oracle, which is just about what every energy company uses nowadays. This allows for a very seamless and same-day flow of payments for businesses, devices, and individuals on the front end, which makes it a lot easier to persuade large businesses, as they probably wouldn't want to be dealing with crypto-based transactions. Now, the last collaboration we'll be talking about for Energy Web today will be actually a partnership revolving around 2 companies, and these 2 are Alias Group, which is a transmission system operator, which is just the industry term for companies that are responsible for transmission or movement of generation plants to power distribution operators. And the other company is BMW. I'm sure we've all heard of BMW at one point or another. They're probably one of the biggest automobile manufacturers out there, especially in Europe. So the goal within the European Union is to be completely carbon neutral by 2050. So of course the automotive sector was kind of an obvious choice to begin innovating, especially with all the talks of electric vehicles nowadays. Getting the product is just one part of the solution. The problem now is having to connect every single one of these devices or cars, along with charging stations, to the new energy grid. And of course, by connecting them, they are creating digital identities using a method called self-sovereign identity, which has been something that's begun picking up a lot of attention in the DLT space from projects like CheckD and some other Hyperledger products such as Hyperledger Indy. So these digital twins of the electric vehicles not only represent the electric vehicles themselves, but they also carry all the data and analytics of the underlying asset that's being provided by the manufacturing company, so in this case BMW, and then it gets verified on the Energy Web chain. This opens doors for a lot of new innovative use cases, such as vehicles and charging stations being connected to the Energy Web Open Charging Network, which enables data sharing and specific energy-related analytics for each car's entire life cycle, which in return allows for an unprecedented level of transparency and an abundance of information for grid operating companies to capture and recognize each specific individual event and identities involved in it, such as seeing if specific EV charging stations are really charging on 100% renewable energy. So by leveraging the Energy Web infrastructure, energy transmission service operators not only have access to full transparent information of devices in a way they've never had before to ensure optimal efficiency, but they also get to pretty much have a network that's already spent years connecting other energy infrastructure players onto their own grid. This is just one component of really bringing the mainstream adoption of electric vehicles to a reality. The next step to really having this all operate in mass is just connecting them to our new grid infrastructure to facilitate green renewables. Alright, so we've done a pretty solid rundown of what the project does fundamentally, in addition to how it flows with the EWDOS, and we even have a better understanding of EAC and IREC standards within the energy sector, other problems with connectivity of distributed energy resources, and the payment flow in the industry by looking into some of their collaborations with the members in their foundation. Now beyond this, they've got a ton of other proof of concepts and case of studies they've done with other members, as we mentioned, and we'll surely cover these in our deep dive series. But just to name a few of these, they've also collaborated with Ripple for blockchain decarbonization and integration with Alliance Block through the Alliance Bridge, collaborating with Volkswagen on creating a blockchain-based energy market, and much more. But moving on, let's take a look at the brains behind the team that are putting this massive and unique DLT operation together. So at the forefront spearheading the project, we got the CEO, Jesse Morris. Now, Jesse's been at Energy Web since the start, but he actually started out as a secretary at Energy Web, then climbed up to Chief Operating Officer, before now taking on the role as Chief Executive Officer. Now, before his time at Energy Web, he'd built up quite a nice relevant background to all the operations he's focused on today. Ever since 2006, he's been focused on working within the energy sector, from research in academias, green energy-focused enterprises, and perhaps his largest position was being a principal at Rocky Mountain Institute, which again is one of the consortiums alongside Grid Singularity that actually founded Energy Web. And Rocky Mountains Institute actually operates quite similarly to Energy Web. They're a non-profit organization made of companies and stakeholders within the energy industry. And their focus for the past 40 or so years has been decarbonizing energy systems. So it kind of makes sense why they would be the ones to create Energy Web, since their goals align pretty much identically. And while Jesse's role at Rocky Mountain was focused on partnering and collaborating with as many tech providers, utilities, policymakers, stakeholders, developers, and everything else revolving around in that sector. So his experience with that and the connections he made very likely has a lot to do with the growth of the Energy Web Foundation today. Next, there's also Walter Kopp. He was the previous Chief Operating Officer and Chief Executive Officer for Energy Web until Jesse took over. Walter now serves as their head strategic advisor, and he definitely has the right experiences to do so. With roughly 30 years of experience working at some of the largest enterprises around telecommunications and information technology, the experience in building up massive networks and connections he's made during those 3 decades definitely became a massive benefit for the Energy Web ecosystem. So he first began at KPN Telecom for 7 years. This is the largest Dutch telecommunications network in the Netherlands that actually sees their largest shareholders being some huge financial institutions like Frank Templeton and BlackRock. He then worked in a plethora of other telecommunications and IT companies that were all kind of similar caliber, such as BT, which is headquartered in the UK in addition to holding a royal warrant, which basically is mark of recognition for people and companies that provide services to Her Majesty's and the royal household. So definitely some interesting connections going on back there. And then he spent 3 years at Vodafone, another large multinational telecommunications corporation. And then finally, before joining the Energy Web team, he was at ING Bank as a director along with Chief Operating Officer, which is a pretty massive role as ING is one of Europe's top banks with over $1.1 trillion in assets under management. And as we discussed, while Energy Web is mainly working in the energy sector, the banking infrastructure is still a key subsector that they have to connect together as well. These energy companies around the world need to be paid, right? And you can't really be doing that unless you seamlessly interconnect correspondent banking networks together. Now, these were only 2 of the key members in the Energy Web team responsible for mainly their connections and really building out the ecosystem together. Of course, there's also a bunch of other tech geniuses and developers, marketing, administration, etc. that all really had to help and build this vision out, but we'll save those members for the deep dive. And now finally, let's cover tokenomics quickly before giving this my personal thoughts to wrap it up. So the EWT stands for Energy Web Token. And of course, it's the native token for their network. There's a total supply of 100 million EWT with a circulating supply of about
70 million.
About 70% in circulation. Not bad relative to many other projects out there. With the distribution of these tokens, they've done so by allocating just a little under 21% to the foundation's operations and technological development, another 38% for the community released over a 10-year period, another 10% dedicated to rewarding validator nodes that they also plan to release over 10 years, another 10% dedicated to the founders, as in the Rocky Mountains Institute and Grid Singularity. And then the final 21% are all dedicated towards their early round affiliates with lockup periods corresponding to each round. The purpose of the Energy Web token is for a variety of things, ranging from being a basic medium of exchange on their platform to a store of value in terms of the value of clean renewables in the ecosystem. But some of the key utilities for the token are, for example, staking it onto other validator nodes, like you would in delegated proof of stake to support good acting members, while also being rewarded from the validator pool of tokens doing so. And of course, as we mentioned, all payments on the network are settled in EWT on the backend, but just appear as a same-day bill credit in Oracle's system for enterprise simplicity and efficiency purposes, thanks to R3. From paying for small microservices for operations like validating digital credentials, such as a discount on carbon credits or as a reward for generating and sharing clean renewable energy, the Energy Web token really fits perfectly within their ecosystem's operations. I personally think Energy Web is something that's so unique to the rest of the crypto space. While yes, it is just fundamentally another layer 1, it's kind of similar to VeChain or Zinfin in the sense that it can do all these basic functions any other layer 1 chain can, like sending assets in a peer-to-peer manner, executing smart contracts, and hosting decentralized applications. But they were actually built with an enterprise-grade focused approach to really allow their network to scale out to specific industry needs for specific use cases that would be only optimal on their network. I could definitely see this trend continuing with other layer 1 blockchains going forward, where while yes, they can be used for general purpose layer 1 things, they're actually built with a specific industry grade use case in mind, since it kind of makes sense to have that perfect middle ground for enterprise and retail utility. The approach they went with a hybrid permissionless network but permission nodes is not only super unique, but really fits what Energy Web needs, and that's the ability to onboard every device, individual, or corporation into their system in a mass scale, while also having specific permissions on validation requirements, as they are technically built in a consortium of some of the biggest energy players in the world. Their token makes sense for the network's operations in fractional microprocesses, and it's integrated in a way where payments can be streamlined for users on the front end as it seamlessly settles on the back end, almost similar to how Quant's treasury operates. The team also definitely has a lot of industry experience around not just how the energy grid works, but even connections to key players in there and other entities that will be essential to the future of our new energy grid system, with everything clean, renewable, IoT, automation, etc. coming closer and closer to reality every day. Overall, I think this is not only a super unique project, but one that's very well thought out. I mean, seeing that their foundation's made of some of the largest energy players in that sector is already saying a lot, in addition to the fact that they were founded by an organization with the exact goal in mind for the past 40 years now. I'm honestly super excited to continue seeing the development and growth of not just the members and projects brewing in the Energy Web ecosystem, but also seeing the continued adoption and migration into this new global energy grid standard on IREX that are all distributed and validated across the Energy Web chain. Alright, but that's about all we've got for today, guys. As usual, I hope everyone managed to get something good out of this, whatever it may be. And if you guys are still hungry for more blockchain fundamental analysis, remember to check out Tokenicer.network for all my content platforms linked in one spot. And as usual, that'll be linked right down in the description below. And until next time, guys, be sure to stay safe and keep grinding. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.